The first thing that hit the floor was a ceramic pot filled with white gardenias. It didn't fall. It was swept off the counter by the arm of a man who had never once been told that his anger had a price. The pot cracked against the tile, dirt spreading across the floor like a dark stain. Then a row of glass vases followed. Then a bucket of peonies tipped sideways, water bleeding into the petals of freshly cut stems. A crate of lilies slid from its shelf and spilled across the entrance. By the time Cash and Cole turned toward the door, half of Blythe and Bloom looked like a storm had moved through it. And through all of it, Juniper Blythe said nothing. She stood behind the ruined counter, both hands pressed flat against the wood, watching him with an expression that wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt. It was something quieter than both of those things. And that silence unnerved Cashin far more than any raised voice would have. He pushed through the door without looking back. Before we go further, if you can already feel where this story is heading, subscribe and hit the notification bell right now. Because what Cash and Cole is about to discover will completely change everything you just saw. Don't miss it. Cash and Cole was 38 years old and had spent the better part of a decade reshaping the city skyline. He didn't just buy buildings. He replaced entire neighborhoods, old theaters, corner bakeries, small restaurants that had fed the same families for generations. All of it gave way eventually to towers with his company's name on the lobby wall. People called him relentless. His board called him visionary. Nobody called him kind. And he had never once lost sleep over that. Cole Plaza was supposed to be his masterpiece. A billion-dollar mixed-use complex in the heart of the city. The project had taken 4 years to plan and 2 years to acquire. Every property on that block had been purchased. Every contract had been signed by every single owner, except one. Blythe and Bloom sat wedged between two aging brick buildings like something that had simply refused to move. A small flower shop with a hand-painted sign, a weathered wooden door, and window boxes overflowing with seasonal color. Cashin had sent 3 offer letters before he ever set foot inside. Market value, then double, then 4 times that, a number that would have set anyone up comfortably for the rest of their life. Each time, June Blythe declined. Not with a counteroffer. Not with a lawyer's letter. Just a polite handwritten note thanking him for his interest and explaining that the shop was not available. His attorneys had been clear. Construction could not begin until that parcel was secured. Every week of delay cost his investors real money. And so Cashin decided to go himself, because in his experience, things that resisted him simply hadn't yet been confronted directly enough. When he walked into the shop that morning, he wasn't prepared for what it felt like inside. It was small, yes, but the light came through the windows in long warm angles, catching the dust motes floating above buckets of fresh-cut flowers. The smell was overwhelming in the best way, green and sweet and alive. For just a moment, standing in the doorway, something in Cashin's chest loosened slightly. An old memory tried to surface. He pushed it down. He placed the contract on the counter and slid it toward her. "Name your price," he said. "Whatever number makes sense to you, I'll match it. I just need this resolved." June looked at the contract, then back at him. She had dark, steady eyes, the kind of calm that comes from having made peace with something a long time ago. "I appreciate that," she said. "But this shop isn't for sale. Everything has a price. Not this." Her voice didn't waver. "My grandmother built this place. She gave 40 years of her life to it. This isn't a transaction for me." She looked at him with the patience of something deeply rooted. "This is the only thing I have left of her." Cashin Cole did not build things. He erased them. That was the distinction his competitors never understood. They saw construction, cranes and concrete and ribbon-cutting ceremonies with politicians holding oversized scissors. Cashin saw subtraction. You identified what was weak, what was old, what was quietly dying without knowing it yet, and you removed it. What came after was almost secondary. He had been doing this since he was 26, when he leveraged everything he owned to acquire a derelict textile block on the east side of the city. Everyone told him it was a graveyard. He told them graveyards were just land with bad branding. 18 months later, the Cole Group's first tower broke the skyline. 12 years after that, there were 11 more. His name was on buildings the way other men's names were on parking tickets, everywhere unavoidable, a reminder that someone had passed through and left the world slightly rearranged. He had no close friends. He had a board, a legal team, and a personal assistant named Dara who had learned not to use the word urgent unless something was actually on fire. He had a mother he visited on Thursdays, Beatrice, 71, sharp as a surgical blade, currently occupying a private room on the 4th floor of Meridian Medical. He did not talk about that at board meetings. What he talked about was Cole Plaza, a billion-dollar mixed-use complex. 42 floors. Premium residential, curated retail, a rooftop terrace that would be photographed in every architecture journal on the continent. It was meant to be the thing people pointed to when they said his name 50 years from now. And it was being held hostage by a flower shop. He told himself it was a minor delay. A contractual nuisance. The kind of friction that every major development absorbed and moved past. He told himself June Blythe was simply someone who hadn't yet understood the offer. He told himself that right up until the moment he walked into Meridian Medical on a Thursday and found a file on his mother's bedside table with a photograph inside it. A photograph of June Blythe. June Blythe had been 7 years old the first time she understood what the shop meant. It was a Tuesday in late October, and her grandmother, Iris, had let her arrange the window display alone for the first time. White chrysanthemums and dried eucalyptus, nothing complicated. June had spent 40 minutes on it, stepping back every few minutes the way she'd watched Iris do, tilting her head, adjusting a stem by half an inch. When she finally declared it finished, Iris had stood beside her in the doorway, looked at it for a long moment, and said nothing. Just put her hand on top of June's head. That silence had felt like the highest praise June had ever received. Iris was gone now. 4 years, 2 months, 11 days. June had stopped counting after the first year, but the number had stayed anyway, the way certain things do. The shop was everything Iris had left her. Not just the building, the muscle memory of it. The particular way morning light came through the east window and made the white blooms glow. The customers who had been coming for decades and still called it Iris's place without realizing they were doing it. The knowledge, passed down through years of quiet instruction, that flowers are not decoration. They are what people bring when words fail them. June knew Cashin Cole's offers had been generous. She wasn't naive. The third letter had contained a number that made her sit down at the workbench and stare at the wall for a full minute. With that money she could have bought a house outright, traveled, started something new, rested. She had written back in her usual hand, on the same cream notepaper she used for all correspondence. Thanked him. Declined. What she hadn't written, what she had never told anyone, was that the shop had once done something for someone in that city that no amount of money could repay. A kindness so quiet it had never made it into any record. Only one person alive still knew the full story. And she was lying in a hospital bed on the 4th floor of Meridian Medical. He told himself he was going to be reasonable. That was the word he used in the car on the way over, reasonable. He would lay out the timeline. He would explain, clearly and without emotion, what continued refusal was costing everyone involved. He would make her understand that this was not personal. It was never personal. It was simply the way large things moved through the world. They displaced smaller things. That was not cruelty. That was physics. He walked into Blythe & Bloom at 9:43 on a Wednesday morning with a revised contract, a number that made his own lawyers uncomfortable, and 12 years of experience getting what he wanted. June was trimming stems at the back counter. She looked up when he entered, registered who he was, and returned to what she was doing. She did not stop working. She did not offer him anything. She simply let him exist in her space the way she might let in a draft, acknowledged, unremarkable, already being managed. That was the first thing that cracked something in him. He placed the contract on the counter. She glanced at it the way you glance at a menu you've already memorized. He spoke. She listened. She was so extraordinarily, immovably calm that Cashin felt something he had not felt in a boardroom or a courtroom or anywhere else in 12 years of building his empire. He felt dismissed. He heard himself getting louder before he made the decision to get louder. He heard the shift in his own voice, the place where reasonable ended and something older and uglier began. And then his arm moved, and the row of vases went, and the dirt spread across the tile, and the water soaked into the petals of everything she had arranged that morning with careful, unhurried hands. The shop went very quiet. June did not scream. She did not cry. She knelt on the wet tile and began methodically to gather the broken pieces. That image, her on her knees, silent, steady, followed Cashin all the way to Meridian Medical 3 hours later. It was still in his head when he walked into his mother's room and saw the file. Beatrice Cole had survived 3 things that should have killed her. A difficult childhood in a city that didn't care about difficult childhoods. A marriage to a man who mistook coldness for strength and passed that confusion on to his son before he left. And 6 months ago, an aggressive autoimmune condition that her doctors had described, with careful understatement, as a serious cause for concern. She did not look serious when Cashin walked in. She looked small, which was worse. Beatrice had never been a small woman. Not in presence, not in opinion, not in the particular way she had of making a room feel like it belonged to her the moment she entered it. Seeing her arranged against hospital pillows with monitors tracking her pulse made something tighten in Cashin's chest that no amount of controlled breathing could loosen. He kissed her forehead. She told him he looked tired. He told her she looked well. They both understood the other was lying and said nothing about it. She was better, genuinely. The treatment had worked with a speed that surprised her medical team. A rare compatibility match, the kind that statisticians described as exceptional, had made a procedure possible that 3 months ago had seemed out of reach. The specialist had used the word miraculous. Beatrice had told him to use a more scientific word. He hadn't been able to find one. Who was the donor? Cashin asked. Beatrice looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. Tender, but careful. The way you look at someone before you decide how much to tell them. Anonymous, she said. They requested it completely. No contact, no recognition. The only condition they gave the hospital was that our family should never be told who it was. Cashin frowned. That's unusual. It's extraordinary, Beatrice said quietly. To do something that's significant and want absolutely nothing in return. She looked at her hands. I think about them every day. Whoever they are, they gave me back my life. The file was on the bedside table. Cashin reached for it before he knew why. The file was not meant for him. He understood that the moment he opened it, administrative paperwork, medical notations, the kind of language that turns a human being into a sequence of measurements and probabilities. He should have set it back down. He was already reaching to do exactly that when a photograph slipped from between 2 pages and landed face up on the white hospital blanket. He looked at it for a long time without moving. Dark eyes. The kind of calm that comes from having made peace with something a long time ago. A face he had last seen 3 hours ago, kneeling on a wet tile floor, gathering broken ceramic with quiet, methodical hands. June Blythe. The room didn't change. The monitors kept their rhythm. Beatrice was saying something about the specialist's recommended follow-up schedule, her voice moving through the air at a normal pace. Everything in the room continued exactly as it had been. Cashin felt the floor shift anyway. He set the photograph down slowly, the way you set down something fragile, though his hands were the ones shaking. His mind moved through it in pieces, the way it processed large numbers, breaking it apart, finding the logic, refusing the conclusion until the arithmetic became undeniable. June Blythe had been his mother's donor. June Blythe, whose shop he had been dismantling legally for 8 months, whose inventory he had destroyed that morning, whose quiet refusal he had mistaken for stubbornness rather than principle. June Blythe had saved his mother's life. Anonymously. Without condition. Asking only that Beatrice's family never be told. She had known, Cashin realized, with a cold that moved through him like water. When he walked into her shop, she had already known who he was. She had looked at the son of the woman she had saved and handed him a polite handwritten note declining his offer. And he had responded by destroying everything she loved. Cashin. Beatrice's voice was gentle. What's wrong? He couldn't answer her. He wasn't sure language worked anymore for what he was holding. He found the nurse in the corridor outside his mother's room. Her name was Clara, according to the badge clipped to her chest, and she had the particular composure of someone who had learned to remain steady in the presence of powerful men having difficult moments. She looked at Cashin, at the photograph still in his hand, at whatever was happening in his expression, and waited. The donor, he said. I need to know about the donor. Clara's composure didn't shift. Mr. Cole, that information is confidential. The donor requested complete anonymity. That isn't a formality, it was a binding condition of the procedure. I've seen the photograph. A pause. Something moved behind her eyes, not surprise exactly, more like the recognition that a thing she had hoped wouldn't happen had happened. She glanced at the file in his other hand, then back at his face. Then you understand, she said carefully, that what I'm about to tell you should not have been necessary. She told him anyway. Not because he pressured her. Because she looked at him standing in that corridor, this man who had clearly just had something fundamental rearranged inside him, and made a judgment call that the truth was already out and cruelty served no one. The donor had come to the hospital quietly, through a referral that had taken months to arrange. She had covered every associated cost personally. No insurance. No reimbursement request. When the procedure was complete and the medical team had expressed their gratitude, she had made one request, delivered without drama or condition. The patient's family must never know who she was. Not her name. Not her face. Nothing. Did she say why? Cashin asked. Clara was quiet for a moment. She said the family had enough to carry. The corridor felt very long suddenly. Very white. Cashin stood in it with a photograph in his hand and thought about a woman kneeling on wet tile that morning, gathering broken pieces without a word, without accusation, without asking him for a single thing. She had already given his family everything she had. And he had gone there to take the last thing she had left. He drove back to the shop without deciding to. That was the only way he could explain it afterward. His hands on the wheel, the city moving past the windows, and no memory of choosing any of it. He simply arrived. The way you arrive at the end of a thought you didn't know you were having. The lights inside Blythe and Bloom were still on. It was past 7. Through the window he could see June moving through the wreckage of what he had done that morning. Not frantically, not with the desperate energy of someone trying to undo a disaster, but with the same unhurried methodology he had noticed before. Sweeping. Salvaging. Deciding with quiet authority what could be saved and what couldn't. He stood on the pavement outside for longer than he would ever admit. The bell above the door announced him when he entered. June looked up. Something crossed her face. Not fear, not anger, not the satisfaction of someone expecting an apology. Just a kind of tired recognition. She set down the broom and waited. Cashin had prepared nothing. Every negotiation, every boardroom confrontation, every difficult conversation of his adult life had been entered with language already arranged, outcomes already mapped. He stood in the doorway of the shop he had destroyed and found that he had nothing. No offer. No strategy. No version of himself that felt adequate to the room. "I know," he said finally. "About my mother. About what you did." June said nothing. The silence was not hostile. It was simply patient, the way she was patient, constitutionally without effort, in a way that made the noise inside Cashin's chest feel very loud by comparison. "I had no right," he said, "to any of it. The campaign, the pressure, this morning," he stopped. "Started again. I can't undo what I did in here. But I will rebuild every piece of it. And the plaza," his voice shifted into something unfamiliar, even to him. "I'm redesigning it. The shop stays. Everything stays." June looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said quietly. He blinked. "You know? I knew you'd come back." She picked up the broom again. "I just didn't know what you'd be when you did." The architecture critics didn't know what to do with it. That was how Cashin knew he had gotten it right. Every major review used the same word, unusual, with a particular hesitation of people who had prepared to be impressed in a specific way and found themselves impressed in a different one entirely. The tower was everything they had expected. 42 floors, clean lines, the kind of glass and steel that caught the morning light and threw it back at the city like an argument. But at its base, where the renderings had always shown a grand symmetrical entrance flanked by curated retail, there was instead a curve. A deliberate, engineered arc in the plaza's foundation, sweeping around a small parcel of land like a river deciding to go around a stone rather than through it. At the center of that curve sat Blythe and Bloom. The hand-painted sign was new. June had repainted it herself, the same letterforms as before, just steadier. The window boxes overflowed with seasonal color. The weathered wooden door had been restored but not replaced, because June had been specific about that. Restored meant it remembered what it had been. Replaced meant it didn't. The plaza's opening drew the expected crowd: investors, journalists, city officials who had opinions about everything and convictions about nothing. They moved through the space in clusters, photographing the tower, photographing the curve, photographing the small flower shop at the center of it all with the bemused energy of people encountering a thing they hadn't been told how to feel about yet. Cashin stood at the edge of the plaza and watched it. He had given 17 interviews in the past month. Every journalist had asked the same question in different ways. Why the curve? Why design an entire billion-dollar complex around a single parcel that represented a fraction of a percent of the total footprint? He had given careful architectural answers about organic design and community integration. None of them were wrong. None of them were complete. The complete answer was inside the shop, arranging white gardenias in a ceramic pot, unhurried and exact, the way she did everything. He hadn't told the journalists that. Some things were not for public consumption. Some debts were too large to be reduced to a quote. Beatrice came to the shop on a Thursday. Cashin hadn't arranged it. He had mentioned carefully and without pressure that the shop existed, that it was worth seeing, that the woman who ran it was someone Beatrice might appreciate. He had not said more than that. Some introductions needed to find their own pace. He waited outside on a bench in the plaza while his mother went in alone. She was in there for a long time. When the door finally opened, Beatrice was moving slowly, which was not unusual. She was still rebuilding her strength, still reclaiming the steadiness the illness had borrowed from her. But it wasn't effort that was slowing her. Cashin could see that from across the plaza. She was moving the way people move when they are carrying something fragile inside them and don't want to disturb it. She sat beside him on the bench and didn't speak for a moment. "There's a photograph on her wall," Beatrice said finally. "Behind the counter. An older woman, standing in this shop, the same shop, but years ago. Decades." She paused. "I know that woman, Cashin." He looked at her. Her name was Iris. "I met her once, a very long time ago. I was young and she stopped. Chose the next words with care. I was in a situation I couldn't see my way out of. It was winter. I had nothing. Her voice was steady but thin, the way ice is steady before it isn't. I came into this shop because it was warm. I didn't buy anything. I couldn't. But that woman, Iris, she gave me a bouquet of white flowers and wouldn't take a cent for them. She said something I've never forgotten. Beatrice looked at her hands. She said, "Some things are given, not sold." The plaza moved around them, voices, footsteps, the ordinary noise of a city going about its afternoon. Her granddaughter saved my life, Beatrice said quietly. And her grandmother saved mine. Cashin didn't have a word for what moved through him then. It wasn't guilt anymore. It wasn't shame. It was something older and more humbling than both, the recognition that kindness, real kindness, doesn't end. It travels. It finds the people it needs to find. It outlasts every tower ever built. He looked up at Cole Plaza rising against the sky, and for the first time in 12 years, it felt like exactly enough. If this story moved you, if you felt something in that last scene, then you already know this channel is where you belong. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment below telling me who you felt most for, Cashin, June, or Beatrice. The kindness isn't finished traveling yet.